This was about 3 years ago. I was staying at a rental house while vacationing to see my brother. He lives 6 hours away from me, so I don't get to see him very often, and he only has a one-bedroom apartment, which makes me have to stay elsewhere when I do see him. The house I rented out was really close to my brother's apartment and was the same price as nearby hotels, so it was an easy choice to go for the house. I had gotten into town early in the morning and met up with my brother for lunch, then got some groceries and was back at the rental around 5 o'clock. The place didn't have a lot to offer other than a couch, TV, and bed, but for the price, I wasn't expecting too much. I stayed up until 9, then got in bed. It had been a long day, so I was looking forward to getting a good amount of shut-eye. I laid in bed awake for longer than I wanted, falling asleep after an hour. When my eyes opened, the room was in full darkness, and I could sense that it was the middle of the night. Before I could even check the time, though, I heard something outside the room. Footsteps slowly walking down the hallway, and then a door closing softly, followed by silence. It was like my whole body had frozen, laying in the bed still and staring through the dark room. After a minute passed of no more sound, I got up and looked into the hallway. At the far end, I could see the front door, which I knew was the door I'd heard them close, but I didn't know if they were still in the house or if they had left. I quietly walked through the other rooms, not seeing anyone. Actually, the only sign of them having been here was the front door being unlocked. I didn't see any footprints or notice anything missing. After checking the locks on all the doors, I called 911. They came fairly quick, but didn't do much of anything. I said to make sure all the doors were locked and to contact the owner, but aside from their useless advice, they provided no intent to figure it out. I stayed up that night and waited until morning, unable to sleep. After calling the owner of the rental and discussing what had happened, I went to see my brother. While out, the owner let me know that he'd changed the PIN code on the door, which did make me feel a lot better. I was out until late that day, though, getting some dinner and drinks with my brother, and being dropped off at the rental sometime between 8 and 9. I went to the couch and sat down, feeling sleepy, but also feeling that nervousness again about the situation. Every time my eyes were about to close, my head would be filled with fear of the intruder coming back. Knowing I needed to sleep tonight, since I didn't get any last night, I decided to go through the house again and check the rooms in hopes to ease my mind. I walked around the living room and kitchen, then went down the hallway to the bedroom. I opened the closet, checked the attached bathroom, and just before I walked out, I heard footsteps running through the hallway toward the bedroom I was in. I swung around the corner and only caught a glimpse of a large man as he slammed the bedroom door shut. Then I heard his footsteps departing and going toward the living room, while I stood in place and just listened. He went all around the living room and kitchen, staying inside the house for probably 2 minutes before I heard the front door open and close behind him. Police came quickly after I called again, and this time the homeowner came by as well. The living room and kitchen looked like they'd been ransacked. The furniture was scattered all over, and the cabinets were all open, with the things inside them having been tossed over the floor. After a closer look, though, the owner didn't see anything that was missing. It looked more like whoever that man was looking for something very specific and nothing more. I left the rental and got a hotel after that, and within a few days, I was never updated again about anything. I assume he was never found, but the situation has left me with a lot of questions. Something that really gets to me is that I had checked the entire house that one night. So where was he hiding? How long had he been in the house with me? Was he watching me? And what would have happened if I had fallen asleep on the couch? I'm 32 and live alone in a rural house. I have a few neighbors half a mile down that I talk to sometimes, but I mostly keep to myself and only go into town when I need to. I'm half retired, so I spend most of my time at home, but a few months out of the year I do some contracting work. At the time it was late fall, and on this day I was getting all of my equipment from out in the yard and storing it in the shed to prepare for the winter season. It was just a bunch of tools and lawnmowers and stuff like that I'd left out. Anyway, while I was outside, I saw something unusual. A man was walking along the road that connected to my driveway. He had nothing on him, no backpack or camping gear. For context, this road he was on was entirely empty, aside from the few houses like mine, and the town was a 4-hour walk away. I watched him until he disappeared far off down the road. After he was gone, I looked down in both directions and saw no cars on the side of the road, on either direction. It was really odd, but after a while I stopped thinking about it and finished up with my yard. I was back inside before dark and made dinner while I cooled off. As I sat there, a sudden thud from outside startled me up from the table. It was a wooden thump, like it had come from where the shed was. I looked through the window out into the yard, and the door to the shed was wide open. It was old, but the door had never unlatched on its own like that before. Still unsure of exactly what was going on, I knew I had to check on it and close the door at the very least. I got my rifle just in case, but I was confident it wasn't going to be anything dangerous. Walking out to the shed, I listened carefully and heard nothing other than the quietness of the night. I looked around the field as well and saw no sign of wildlife or people. When I got to the open shed door, I turned on my flashlight and shined it inside. Nothing looked out of place. I stepped in and did a more thorough search for any animals hiding, but still there wasn't anything. I closed the door to the shed and made sure it was secure, then started walking back. As I made my way through the field toward my house, an eerie feeling grew inside me. I didn't know what it was, but it continued to grow as I reached the front door. I stepped in and locked the door behind me. As I walked into the hallway, I saw a shoe print right on the floor. I flicked on the light, and going across the hallway was a line of dirty shoe prints leading up to the spare bedroom. My heart started beating faster as I held my rifle up and took a deep breath, then carefully walked up to the door. I leaned my head against the wood and listened, hearing what sounded like someone breathing right on the other side. Before I could even think on what to do next, the handle twisted from my grip and the door swung open. I jumped back and held the rifle up as a man looked like he was about to charge at me, holding a huge metal shovel up. I think my gun stopped him in his tracks though. He stood in the doorway, holding the shovel like a weapon and having a face full of rage. I yelled as loud as I could for him to stay back, trying to sound intimidating, but I was undoubtedly terrified. The man kept his distance, but his face full of anger never faded. From this moment though, I didn't know what to do. Ops wouldn't be able to make it here for probably an hour if I called, and I definitely didn't want to hold him at gunpoint for that long, risking anything to happen. As we stood in a strange silence, the man suddenly threw the shovel in my direction, then sprinted back into the room. I ran in to see what he was doing and watched him start crawling out of the window. Part of me wanted to stop him, but another part of me couldn't get myself to. He jumped out and ran off into the field, escaping in the vast empty night, with no way of knowing where he was running off to. To this day, that man has never been identified, and his intentions are unknown. All I can say is that if I hadn't had my rifle in my hands, or if he had gotten the jump on me, I likely wouldn't be here today. I was 18 at the time, and it was the beginning of summer, so I was off from school and I didn't have any job. The majority of my time was spent inside the house playing video games, watching YouTube or TV, or just relaxing. When this happened, my parents were out of town for a few days, leaving me with the house. This was a common thing, it was never a big deal. Sometimes I'd invite friends over or whatever, but this night I was just enjoying the time to myself. I was watching a rerun of one of my favorite shows on Netflix, while also scrolling through my phone. It was late, I don't know the exact time, but I think maybe 11 or 12, when there was a knock at the front door. I paused the TV and went to see who it was. It almost didn't even register in my mind that it was so late, but thankfully it did before I carelessly would have opened the door. I looked in the peephole and saw two men, both wearing similar clothes, and just waiting for me to answer. I stood there and thought for a second whether or not to let them know I was home by asking what they wanted. I ended up staying quiet and just watching to wait for them to leave, but a few seconds later, they called out. "Hello? We're here looking to Mr. and Mrs. Jens." That was my parents they were referring to, though I changed the name for privacy. Confused, I still remained quiet, knowing it was far too late for any sort of visit, even if it was important. After a minute, the men looked at each other and said something quietly, then walked off the porch. The outdoor lights were off, so I couldn't see where they went, but I never saw any headlights or cars show up, which had me wondering if they'd walked here, which would only make things weirder. I went back to the TV, but left it on pause for a while so I could hear if they came back. It only took a few minutes until I heard a pair of footsteps outside the house. They went up to the porch, but instead of knocking like they did before, they started making their way around to the side of the house. I got up and ran to the back window as they got to the backyard. I saw them open the fence and enter, and I hid away from the window so I wouldn't be seen, but I could hear them go up to the back door. They started talking, then began messing with the door. I took this as my chance to get my phone and hide inside the garage. I called the police, explaining the possible break-in that was taking place, and after less than a minute, a loud pop sound vibrated through the house, and the back door slid open. Their footsteps went through the house and straight to the stairs, going up to the bedrooms. The door opened, and they entered, then closed it behind them. But after that, there were no more sounds. I waited for a horrifying and slow 10 minutes in silence before the police pulled up to the house. When they did, there was a few quick footsteps upstairs, then the two men started arguing. A few officers came in through the back door and ran upstairs, while another came to the garage and helped me outside. The men didn't resist arrest, but they also didn't speak a word on why they were there. Despite weeks going by, and it being somewhat obvious that they weren't simply robbing the house, the only thing they could charge them with was breaking and entering. It scares me, though, that they seemed to be looking for my parents, and it almost felt like they were going to wait upstairs for them until they came back from their trip. I think back to whether or not I should have shown myself, and if that would have stopped the break-in. But something about their behavior tells me that they still would have broken in, and would have done to me whatever was necessary. I'm 34 and live alone in a rather large house. I was married and had kids, but I'd gotten divorced the year before. This house is meant for a large family, but I've never had the time to move out, so I just stayed. Being the only person in a large house, a lot of sounds resonate through the empty house all the time. The most common sound was from the air conditioner. It would make a hollow thud sound in the walls, which would then resonate through the house, sounding much louder than it actually was. Don't get me wrong, it was creepy at first, but I got used to it. Anyway, this happened on a Thursday night after I got home from a long day at work. I went straight upstairs and took my work clothes off to put something more comfortable on, then jumped on the bed and turned on the TV in my room. I didn't spend much time downstairs because I didn't need to. I had everything in my room, so the only time I would be downstairs for more than a couple minutes was if I was in the kitchen. I laid back and rested my eyes. After a moment, through the TV playing, I heard that familiar sound. I didn't even open my eyes, I just continued to rest. An hour later, somehow having not fallen asleep. I got up, getting hungry for dinner. I turned the TV off and opened my bedroom door, and almost on cue, that bang sound resonated again. I'd never recalled the AC making that sound more than once or twice a day, especially without touching the thermostat. I walked across the hallway to where the upstairs thermostat was. It was off, which means that it had been off all day. I wasn't fully scared yet, though. My initial reaction was to try and figure out why the air conditioner was running while I had it off. I was really just upset that this inconvenience had to happen tonight. I went downstairs into the kitchen. The only thing I had left in my fridge was leftover pizza from a few days ago, so I set the oven and heated it up. I stood in the kitchen on my phone while I waited. Again, this time it was much louder and felt like it even shook the house. This was the moment I started to get scared. I hadn't convinced myself fully that this wasn't just the AC acting up, but other possibilities were starting to creep into my mind. Once the pizza was done, I ate quickly, then figured it best to go into the basement and check the AC unit. I didn't want to be creeped out the whole night. I just wanted to know what it was and be done with it. I opened the basement door and flicked on the lights. There was nothing special to this basement. It was unfinished and just had some old furniture, along with some boxes with seasonal decorations in them. I walked down the steps to the bottom, then walked over to the AC unit. I wasn't sure what to look for, so I was kind of just looking around for anything obviously wrong. And while I didn't find anything, I did notice that it was completely off. Nothing was running. It had to be something else, which was not giving me the peace of mind I was looking for. I started walking back to the stairs, planning to check some other rooms on the first floor. But just as I started walking, I saw a figure right under the steps. The lighting was dim, but his eyes gave away his position. The person was crouched down behind some boxes under the stairs. I knew he saw me looking at him, as we were making eye contact, and I had completely stopped walking. In hindsight, I wish I had pretended to not notice and continued walking, but in the moment, I couldn't help my reaction. Once I snapped out of it, I sprinted up the steps and slammed the door behind me, locking it shut and putting a kitchen chair up against it. I didn't hear them following me, so I took it as a sign that they weren't here to fight. I called the police while standing next to the basement door in case they tried to escape. I was scared, but I also didn't want them to get away. I stayed on the line until the lady said the officers were 3 minutes away. Then I heard it again. The person down there was hitting something. Over and over, heavy blows hitting something solid. Seemed like either the concrete floor or the wall. From the resonance of the hits, though, it felt too heavy to not destroy the wall, so I assumed the floor, but I had no idea why. After maybe 20 hits, it went silent. Moments later, officers came to the door. They captured the man downstairs quickly, and he surprisingly looked like a very normal man. Regular clothes, well-groomed. Didn't really look like he would be someone to break into a home. The officers brought up 2 tools as well, a thick crowbar and a large hammer. After retaining the man and putting him in the car, one of them brought me into the basement to show me what was going on. In the far corner, opposite of the AC unit, there was rubble and plywood shards all over the ground. I don't know how I didn't notice it. On the wall, though, were huge indents of metal. It was almost unrecognizable, but it was a small, old safe that was built into the wall. The damage that was done to the wall safe looked insane, and I was shocked that it hadn't given in. It's funny, though, because there was nothing in it. I do remember the seller mentioning it and giving me a code when we moved in, but I never bothered to stash anything in there. The officer I was talking to said they'd seen it before in a lot of the big homes around the area, as a lot of burglars go straight to the safe and often don't loot anything else in the house. Of everything, the fact that the man looked so normal is what creeped me out the most. Just knowing that literally anyone could be doing things like this is not a comforting thing to think about. I ended up repairing the wall and just covering the safe. I also plan to move out soon and get a smaller house that's easier for me to stay alert in, because this situation could have been a lot worse than it was, and I don't want to take any chances next time. I was 16 at the time. My parents were away on a short vacation to celebrate their 20th anniversary. I acted sad when they left, but really I was super excited to be alone and have the whole house to myself. They left Friday morning after I went to school. When I got home, I made a quick snack with the food they left me, then went to the living room to play video games for the entire night. I had no school tomorrow and nobody was home to tell me to go to bed, so I wanted to stay up as late as possible and enjoy the time I had. I was playing online with my friends for a while, but my buddies weren't as lucky as me, so at around 10 p.m., all of my friends had to hop offline. Come 11, or maybe closer to 12 even, my neighbor's dog started barking. They have a huge dog, though it was really loud, even though their house was a good distance away from mine. I kept playing, but through the headphones I could still hear the dog barking like crazy for what had been a whole 3 or 4 minutes. It was really late, so I was both concerned and annoyed. When I found a good time to pause my game, I got up really fast and looked out the side window over at their house. None of their lights were on, but their dog was still barking. I was pretty sure it was barking from inside the house, too. Then I saw a man walking through their yard and onto the sidewalk. It was dark and hard to see, and I didn't see where he came from. Knowing the dog was probably barking at the guy by their house, and seeing him walking away, I went back to playing my game. I played for 15 minutes or so before someone knocked on my door. It made me jump, but I was in the middle of a match, so I couldn't just get up. I kept playing, hearing the knocks continue. When the match ended, I took my headphones off and heard the knocks again. With my headphones off, though, I realized it was coming from the back door, not the front door. And I remembered how late it was and got really confused, but also a bit agitated. What could they possibly want from me this bad to be continually knocking on the door at midnight? I stood up, but then I decided I didn't want them to see me, and thought that if they realized nobody was home, then they'd leave and come back some other time. And if they stayed, then I'd know something was wrong. All the blinds were closed, so I didn't have to worry about that. I sat back down and continued playing. No more knocks came for a while after that. I played until almost 2 a.m. I was really tired, and my eyes were struggling from staring at the TV for so long. I took my headphones off and turned off the TV, then went upstairs to get in bed. I laid in bed for a few minutes maybe, not very long, when I heard something outside. A vehicle coming up our gravel driveway and stopping right in front of the garage. I stayed in bed, listening carefully. Someone got out of the car and closed their door, then walked around the house. I lost track of the footsteps once they made their way toward the backyard. A shiver ran through me. I got up and walked down the stairs slowly, still trying to not let anyone know I was home. But about halfway down the stairs, I heard someone by the back door. It sounded like they were messing with the lock. I ran back upstairs and called the police. I tried not to sound panicked, probably because I was a stupid 16-year-old and wanted to be cool, but they dispatched some officers to my house and told me to wait for 10 minutes until they arrived. I said okay and hung up the phone, then locked my bedroom door and waited. A minute later, there were a few noises coming from the back door. Then it opened. I heard someone walk in and go into the living room. It sounded like they were taking things and putting them in a box. They moved quickly through each room downstairs, but after they went through the kitchen, they left, going back outside. I heard their car door open and close. I was relieved for just an instant, before I heard footsteps reapproaching the house, coming back inside and into the last room downstairs. I guess they dropped the box off and came back for more. At this point, I was regretting not showing myself, because the person downstairs really seemed to think nobody was home. He was making a lot of noise and was confident enough to come in for seconds. I was still sitting in my room, just listening to this horrible event taking place below me, when the footsteps started coming up the stairs. They went straight for my parents' bedroom, just right next to mine. They were in there for a while, then they came out and went up to my door. The handle shook. Then the footsteps immediately left, back down the stairs and out of the house. The car pulled out and was gone in seconds. My heart was beating rapidly. I was trying to control my breathing. I thought I was seconds away from having to fight for my life. When the police finally arrived, I told them everything. They called my parents too. After they checked around and finished getting info from me, the officers were confident that the person wasn't coming back now that he knew I was inside the home. Aside from all that, my console was stolen, along with a bunch of other expensive things. So not only was I horrified all week, but I was also left with nothing to do until my parents got home. I'm just happy that whoever was behind that door ran away and didn't try to break inside, because if he saw me, I don't know what would have happened. I work from home most days of the month. Sometimes I have to go into the office to pick something up or have an in-person meeting, but that would only be once or twice a month. Working from home is really nice, but I often find myself getting distracted easily. On this day, I had a lot to get done and not a lot of time to do it. I was focused, working on my laptop in the office, when the doorbell rang. I rushed over to the door and opened it a crack, seeing a man on my porch. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Hi, I'm looking for Mr. Peters," the man said, smiling at me. That was my name, but I didn't recognize him. "That's me. What did you need?" The man said he had important information to discuss with me, and asked if we could talk in more privacy inside the house. I first asked what the information was about, but he declined to give any details. "I'm okay then," I said, closing the door. I went back upstairs to my office and started working again. A minute later, though, the doorbell rang again. Knew it had to be the same man, but started making me frustrated. I ran back down to the door and opened it, fully prepared to tell the man to leave. He was already gone. There was no one at the door, and no cars or anything outside the house. I stuck my head outside and looked around, then closed the door again. And the rest of the day went by without any more issues. I finished working, though had to do an hour of overtime. Once it got late, I shut off the TV and went upstairs to shower before bed. I turned on the water and was waiting for it to heat up, and the doorbell rang again. I checked my phone, seeing it was 10:30. I wasn't going to open the door, but I wanted to see who it was, so I went back down and looked through the peephole. There was a man on the porch in dark clothing and with a face mask on. Even with the cover-up, I could tell it was the same man from earlier, based on his body shape and the way he was standing. My whole body froze. I just watched him through the peephole. He rang the doorbell again. I could see he had something big in one of his pockets, either a large knife or a gun. It didn't even feel like any of this was really happening. I backed up quietly, but I think he may have heard me because he called out, "I'm looking for Mr. Peters. I need to tell him something important." Thinking he knew I was there already, I ran upstairs and got my phone, calling 911. While on the phone, a gunshot ripped through the house. The sudden sound made my ears ring. I couldn't even hear what the officer was saying. The ringing faded over the next minute, and I heard nothing else. I was sure the guy had left, but I was still going to wait for the police. It was quiet for the whole time, until I heard sirens coming. Once they seemed to be nearby, I opened the bathroom door and stepped out and went over to the stairs. That's when I saw the front door was busted open, and not a second later, the man sprinted across the hallway and out the door, just before the cops pulled up. I think he had shot the lock out, and my ears were ringing so bad that I didn't hear him come inside. I gave the cops a description of the man. There wasn't much else to go off of. The man was obviously at my home to hurt me, likely kill me. He knew my name and had been looking for me. That's what still scares me. Until he gets caught, I don't think I'll ever get over the fear of him coming back. I lived alone in a small house in Upper Wisconsin. It's in a small community with a couple dozen houses in the area, but it's a few miles away from town. I'd been living in that same house for about 4 years. For the most part, I hadn't had any issues. I liked not being in a busy area and just having trees surrounding the community. I worked a normal 9-to-5 job though, which meant driving into town most days and getting home around 6. This all happened last year, and afterwards, I sold my house and moved closer to town because the thought of it happening again still gives me chills. I woke up one morning at my usual time to get ready for work. I got dressed and made a bowl of cereal, then drove into town. At 5, I started the drive back home. The sun was setting, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, it was dark out. I headed inside and dropped my bag on the kitchen chair, then started searching through the pantry for something to eat for dinner. As I looked through the shelves, though, I noticed something odd. The box of cereal I had for breakfast wasn't where I remembered to have put it. Actually, it wasn't anywhere at all. I looked around the kitchen for a minute, just really confused and thinking that I was losing my mind. I got frustrated after a bit and gave up, making a quick dinner and trying to enjoy the rest of the night. At 10 o'clock, my eyes were getting really heavy, so I turned off the TV and stumbled into the kitchen to fill up my water bottle before bed. Then I went over to the back door to turn off the back porch lights, but just before I switched them off, I saw something far back at the edge of the yard. A figure standing among the trees, just past the reach of the lights. I had no way to get a closer look, so I just stood there, looking at them for a few seconds, till I saw them walk away, deeper into the forest. It was really strange and gave me chills, but I wasn't really sure what exactly even happened. I was more confused than anything. I switched off the lights and went to bed. In the morning, I got ready for work again and went downstairs. But when I opened the pantry, the box of cereal was there, the one that I thought had been missing. It was sitting right where I'd left it. I figured I just missed it somehow and quickly ate and went to work. All day, though, I sat at my desk thinking about it. The more I thought of it, the more sure I was that it was not there yesterday. Then the figure by my house came to mind and only got me more freaked out. It was Friday, though, so I had the weekend to relax and collect myself. At 4, my boss let the staff go home early, which was a big relief for me because I couldn't focus anyways. I drove home, getting there just before 5. As soon as I stepped through the door, though, something was off. I didn't know what, but I could just feel it. I walked into the kitchen, and everything seemed to be in place. I froze. It came from the living room. "Hello?" I called out. It was quiet again. I stepped slowly to the entryway of the living room and scanned the room. I took a few more steps in and walked carefully through, checking behind everything. There was nothing, and no one. I went back by the front door, preparing to check upstairs, when I heard sudden footsteps shuffling through the kitchen. I turned my head and looked down the hallway. A man was standing at the far end, looking at me. It was like my brain and body just shut down for a second as we stared at each other. I spun around and swung open the front door. I heard his footsteps coming up behind me as I sprinted out of the house and ran all the way to my neighbor's house. They called the police for me and let me stay with them until they arrived. The man was of course gone by then, but they found one of the window hinges to be broken, allowing access to the home even when locked. They also found some disturbing evidence of the man having likely been spending hours inside my house, eating my food and everything. There was no way to tell how long it had been going on for. After that, I put my house up for sale and stayed with some relatives until I was able to move. I don't know if that man was harmful, or if he was just living in my house because he could, but I could never shake the sight of him standing at the end of my hallway, staring at me with those dead eyes. I was 16 at the time, and I lived with my single mom in an apartment. I was an only child, and my mom worked 2 jobs, so I was left home alone pretty often once I got old enough to take care of myself. I was never scared of being alone, mostly because I was in an apartment complex with a lot of other people living above and below me. On this day, my mom was working both jobs, so when she got out of her first shift at 2, she went straight to her next shift, started at 3 and ended at 11. It was summer, so I was out of school. I didn't have a car or anything, so all I could really do was walk around or stay home. I spent most of my morning watching TV and even took a short nap. At 6, I was getting hungry for dinner. We didn't have much of anything for me to eat though, so I took some cash off the counter and walked to the grocery store. It was a 40-minute walk, but at least the weather was nice. I got something small to snack on, as well as a frozen meal, then started the walk back. It was already dark out, but the whole road home was well lit and not in a dangerous area, so I wasn't worried. I'd done this plenty of times before. Halfway back, though, I recognized that a man walking a ways behind me was taking all the same turns as me. Picked up the pace, but I never seemed to lose him. The final road led straight to the apartment complex, and there was nothing else down there, but he still trailed behind me. I was nervous, but also aware that it was most likely just someone else who lives in one of the apartments. I got to the entrance and went up to my room. I knew everyone who lived in my complex, or at least what they looked like, so I knew that whoever that man was couldn't get inside, if he even was trying to follow me. I took my frozen meal out and started heating it up in the microwave. About a minute went by before I heard a buzz from the room below me. Then from my room. And then the one above me. It was someone at the entrance door, requesting to be buzzed in. This was something people would do often if they forgot their keys. They would ring all of the rooms in hopes that someone would be kind enough to buzz them in. I waited for a moment, then heard the faint sound of the entrance door unlocking and opening. Someone let them in. I walked around and put my ear against the door, listening carefully. I heard a knock at one of the rooms downstairs. Then someone answered. It was extremely difficult to hear any specific words, but at one point, I could have sworn I heard my name. My heart started racing. The door downstairs closed, and footsteps started coming up the stairs. They walked right up to my door and stopped. I backed away from the door and tried to be quiet. They knocked again. "Hello? Your mom asked me to check up on you. Just answer the door and let me know you're alright." Not to make this sound bad, but my mom would never randomly send someone to check up on me while she was so busy with work. This was definitely something bad. I moved to the opposite corner of the room and dialed 911. The man continued knocking and calling out for me as the police were on their way. At one point, he even started kicking the door as if trying to knock it down. I was terrified and locked myself in my room. Eventually, the knocking stopped. Officers showed up a few minutes later. The woman living in the room downstairs told the officers that the man said he was a babysitter and had asked her if she knew which room was mine. She said he knew my name and everything, so she didn't even think not to trust him. It's pretty clear, though, that he was probably trying to kidnap me. Unfortunately, they had no way of identifying the man, aside from the woman's description, so he was never found. It still creeps me out, though, wondering how the man knew my name and that my mom wasn't home. How long had he been stalking me for? And is he still? I'm a 31-year-old female, and this happened when I was 29, back in 2020. My friend, let's call her Stacy, told me that she had a friend, well, called Brienne, that needed a dog sitter because Brienne and her husband were going on a vacation to California. Stacy knew I dog sat on an app called Rover, which is an app where you house sit random strangers' dogs, walk them, you name it. I thought it was the perfect opportunity since I was in need of some cash. $200 to dog sit for 5 days. Why not? Right? Brienne showed me around her house a week before I dog sat, while also letting me meet her huge husky named Bear. I'm not going to lie, it was a big husky, little overweight too, but still adorable. Brienne told me that I was welcome to help myself to whatever food I wanted. The front door also included a lock where you punch in a number code to get in, so it was pretty secure. So, a week rolls around, and I showed up later on a Friday night, not too long after Brienne and her husband left the house to go to California. Things were pretty chill for the first 2 days. I was at work for most of the afternoon, went to feed the dog on my break, came back later at night, and would take Bear for rides in my car. I stayed up late watching movies, and let Bear sleep by me when it was time to go to bed. Anyway, after work on a Monday night, I hear a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole, and it was a guy that looked like he was wearing a black police uniform. I thought it was a bit odd, but opened the door to see what was up. "Hello, looking for a George," he said. "George?" I thought. "Oh, no, there's no George here. I'm dog sitting for a friend. I've been here since Friday." Looking back, it was pretty stupid to tell a random person at the door I didn't know that I was alone. "Oh, okay. How long are you here?" he said. "Till Wednesday," I responded. "Oh, that's cool. Okay, sorry to bother you." And then he left. I was slightly weirded out and locked the door. I texted Brienne about what just happened. He pretty much just said, "Oh, don't worry about it," and shrugged it off. I thought that was weird too. Things were normal again up until I went to bed Wednesday at midnight. As I was laying in bed, the thought kept coming to my mind that I should make sure the front door was locked. So I got up and checked it. Luckily it was, but I still had a weird vibe. I fell asleep, then woke up 3:05 a.m. to the dog barking like crazy. It freaked me out a little. I thought someone had broken in. I got up and went to the living room, where I saw Bear was growling and barking at the front door. I looked through the peephole and saw the same guy, with another guy this time, standing there in security guard uniforms. At this point, I was creeped out. Why would the same guy come back when he knew I was alone? I didn't bother opening the door this time. Two guys I didn't know, dressed like security guards at 3 a.m. I made sure all the doors were locked. When I saw that they had walked off, I opened the door and didn't see any type of security car anywhere. I still have to think Bear. I think his barking could have been what scared them off. I went back inside and fell asleep. I didn't bother telling Brienne because she was in Cali anyway. I'm glad to say I only stayed one more night after that. To this day, I still don't know who those guys were or what they wanted, and I haven't been back to dog sit since that incident. For the past few years, I've been working 2 jobs and typically leave my house around 6 in the morning and don't get home until 10 at night. Then I sleep, and on most days I repeat that same schedule. Unfortunately, that's just the situation I've been in for a while, but this happened just a couple months ago. I'd come home one night and did what I usually do, which is shower and get ready for bed. But while I was in the shower, I heard some movement that sounded like it was just outside the bathroom door. I quickly got out and checked and saw nothing, so I figured it just had to be the house creaking or something. I finished cleaning up and got in bed. All throughout the night, I kept hearing these odd noises coming from all throughout the house. Mostly just some sort of creaking, kind of like if it was really windy outside and making the house sway. But there was no wind and no reason for the house to be making any noise. At one point in the middle of the night, I even got up and walked around to try and find out what it was, but I found nothing. In the morning, I was very tired and had to work the whole day relying on coffee to keep me awake. By the time I got home, I was exhausted and sleepy, really hoping for a good night's sleep. I went right upstairs and turned the shower on, but before I even got in, I heard something outside the bathroom door again. This time I was sure it was right outside the door, and it sounded like it passed right by and left the bedroom. Although as unlikely as it was, it really sounded like something had moved across my room. I knew I had to look to see if someone was there, but I was feeling really uneasy. When I did finally get the courage to look, I didn't see anything. I walked through the whole house and did a quick look around each room, but I was convinced it had to be something odd going on inside the walls or under the floorboards. I showered and got in bed, falling asleep just before midnight. The instant I woke up, I knew something was wrong. It was very dark, so it was still well into the night, and the entire house was silent. I wasn't sure what had woken me up, but I could feel that it had something to do with the sounds I'd been hearing. I peered over at the door and saw the slightest movement of a shadow from under the crack. I jolted up and stared across the room. My heart immediately started racing as I saw the shadow move away from the door and heard them begin walking down the upstairs hallway. I was horrified and frozen in fear, but it must have been the surge of adrenaline that got me out of my bed and made me swing open the door. I looked out, and standing at the end of the hallway was the dark outline of a man. His eyes were the only thing that really stood out to me. They pierced through me with the sense of anger and restlessness. I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it. The man's footsteps immediately went down the stairs, but it took another 30 seconds before I heard him leave the house. I got the police to come as soon as possible, but they didn't have much luck. They found a few signs of the man being in my house for at least a few days, but that was about it. I don't know where he was hiding, but I always think back to when I'd hear him walk past the bathroom door. Maybe he was sleeping in my bed, then quickly would hide in the closet until I got in the shower, where he would take the opportunity to leave the room. I also wonder why he spent that extra time downstairs before leaving the house when he knew I'd seen him and had likely called the police. Everything is just speculation at this point, but knowing that some random man was hiding in my house while I was sleeping is a horrifying thing to think about. As far as I know, the man hasn't come back, and there have been no updates on his identity. Last year I moved into a new house far from the city. My new job was work from home, so I had no reason to be in a clustered and expensive city anymore. For the first couple months, I was enjoying everything about the place, especially it being so far from other people. But on a regular weekday afternoon, I got a knock at my door. This was actually the first time anyone had come up to my door at this place since I moved in, so it caught me a little off guard. I went up and opened the door to a tall middle-aged man. "How can I help you?" I smiled to be friendly, thinking he was probably a neighbor from down the street. But strangely, first thing he did was lean to the side and look past me into my house. It was like he was trying to see who else was home. Being weirded out by his behavior, pulled the door in and blocked the way with my body. Before saying anything, the man turned and walked away from the door. I stayed and watched him go all the way down the driveway and continue walking until he got to the street, where he got into a parked car and drove off. Without a doubt, that was the strangest encounter I'd ever had with someone up until that point, and I really had no idea how to even think about it. That night, I stayed home for dinner just to make sure the man didn't come back. I debated calling the police to put in a report, but I thought I'd sound stupid for doing that just because some man came up to my door and did nothing. Around 9 p.m., I turned on the TV and tried to get myself more relaxed before trying to sleep. While I was on the couch, though, I heard a voice speaking outside. I quickly muted the TV and listened. It was muffled, but I could make out at least two separate people talking somewhere in the back of my yard. I ran up to the back window and opened up the blinds. In the distance, I could see two figures walking across my backyard. One of them had a long tool or object in his hand, but the other one was too hard to see clearly. They walked between the trees in my yard until they reached the side of my house. I went over to the side window and tried to see where they went, but I lost track of them and they had stopped talking. I checked every window and still couldn't see or hear them anymore. The loud knocking at my front door made me jump and sent chills through my body. I walked up, trying not to make any noise, and looked through the peephole. There was one man dressed in dark clothing and wearing a hat that covered his eyes. He had to be one of the men I'd just seen, but where was the other? "What do you want?" I yelled, figuring they likely already knew I was home, or maybe I'd scare them away. The man stayed on the doorstep and looked over at the side of my house, then looked back at the door. After a few seconds, the lack of response started to terrify me. I went back to the living room to get my phone and call the police, but was interrupted by a loud smashing sound, followed by another and another. I looked across the hall and saw a man hitting a shovel against the back door. He saw me and looked at me for a second, then ran away. I was so scared, I hesitated on whether to call the police or try to find somewhere to hide. The best answer was obviously to do both, but my thoughts were interrupted again when I heard the side window getting hit. I got my phone and dialed 911 while the man continued to hit the window over and over. But just as the police picked up the phone, everything went quiet. And it stayed quiet until the police came. When they pulled in, I was surprised by a sudden commotion outside. It turned out to be the man at the door who had chosen not to leave. And after a closer look, It was the same man who'd come by earlier that day. Strangely, when the police detained him, he refused to say anything about the other man that was with him. He denied everything over and over, even though there were clear cracks and dents in the doors and windows. It was frustrating to listen to, and even weeks later, the man still refused to detail why he had come by my house twice that day, or who the other man was. Everything remains so unanswered that it still creeps me out to this day. Why was the man trying to break in so bad? And what purpose did the man at my doorstep serve, aid in the break-in? I moved away in the following months and have since only been hoping that it wasn't me they were after, or are still after. When I was growing up, I lived with my mom in a small house. During my middle school and high school years, she took up an overnight job, so most nights of the week I was alone between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. This happened a few months before I graduated high school. On a regular night at 7:30, I said goodbye to my mom like usual, then I played some video games for a few hours. It was a school night, so I couldn't stay up super late, but I still stayed up later than I should have. Around 11:30, I shut everything off and went up to my room to get in bed, but I was on my phone for probably another hour before falling asleep. When I woke up, I thought I heard a door closing downstairs. I looked over at the clock next to my bed and saw it was 3:30, so I assumed my mom had just gotten home from work early. I turned over and tried to go back to sleep as I listened to footsteps walking around downstairs. After a minute, though, I started listening more intently. Usually, my mom would go straight upstairs when she got home to get ready for bed, but it sounded like they were just walking around. As I listened for another 2 or 3 minutes, I realized they weren't even stopping at all. They were going through each room, walking slowly as if they were taking a tour of the house. I started to get a little nervous that it might not be my mom and could be someone else. I got up and turned on the light in my room, and almost right away, the footsteps stopped. I listened from the other side of my door and still heard nothing. Carefully, I opened it and looked out into the hallway. I was expecting to see some light coming from downstairs, but the whole house was dark. Whoever was walking around down there hadn't turned on any of the lights, which frightened me more than I already was. I made sure not to make any sounds and stepped further down the hallway until I was at the top of the stairs. Then I knelt down and looked through the railing to see into the living room. Nobody was there, and even in the dark, I could tell that nothing had been moved at all. My PlayStation was still there, and in my head, that was a telltale sign that there was nobody else in the house, except for maybe my mom. I mean, if someone was here to rob us and had walked through the whole house, they definitely would have taken the most expensive thing in the room. At that point, I just wanted to know if it was my mom who was walking around, or if I was having some weird auditory hallucinations. I walked down the steps to the bottom and called out, "Mom, you home?" There was no response or signs of movement in the whole house, so I walked through the hallway into the kitchen. Right away, I saw a shoe print on the tile floors, and when I looked up, my eyes locked on a figure. Across the room, a man was sitting at the dining table with a dark mask on. His clothing was all black, which made it difficult to fully make out any features of him. He was looking at me, but he didn't say anything or even move. He stared at me with an emotionless look. I ran straight back upstairs and locked myself in my room as I called 911. The operator kept me updated on the police's estimated arrival, but after a minute, I heard the man slowly walk across the downstairs and over to the bottom of the staircase. I was whispering to the operator in a panic until I heard the front door open and the man walking away from the house. Not even 30 seconds later, I saw headlights shining through the window. My mom pulled into the driveway, and I ran outside to meet her and tell her what was going on. When police got there, they did a thorough search and found nothing incriminating that would help us find the man. But from what it seems, the man wasn't there to rob us. He also didn't seem to have any interest in me either, which means that he was most likely trying to hurt or abduct my mom. It would then make sense why he broke in only minutes before my mom usually gets home. It makes me think about what could have happened if I hadn't gone downstairs to see who was there, or if my mom had gotten home just a minute earlier and gone inside, unknowing of the man that was waiting for her.